Daniel stood at the edge of the colony, staring out into the endless fields of tall alien grasses swaying gently in the breeze. The air was thick with the scent of strange flowers, and the sky above was painted with shades of orange and purple as the twin suns began to set. The peaceful world of Vexus 3 was beautiful, but for Daniel, it was suffocating. He wasn't a part of the community, not in the way everyone else was. The people here had their own little groups, their own bonds, and their own understanding of how things worked. Daniel had none of that. He had never quite fit in. His thoughts often drifted to things most didn't care about, and his questions were too big, too complicated, for the simple, everyday life most of the colonists led. He could never understand why the others ignored him, or worse, looked at him like he was some sort of problem. All he ever wanted was to be a part of something. He never asked to be different. He didn't want to stand out. Yet here he was, a quiet shadow on the fringes of the colony, the person everyone avoided. In the midst of this loneliness, the unexpected happened. A ship landed on the outskirts of Vexus 3, and for the first time, someone seemed to notice him. The Zaneri were an alien species, a race of beings who ruled vast stretches of space. The Zaneri Empire was powerful, its influence spanning many worlds, but their visit to this small, human-colonized planet wasn't the kind of thing Daniel thought he'd ever witness. Their ship was magnificent, a sleek, black vessel that seemed to absorb the sunlight around it. The people aboard it were even more remarkable, tall, elegant, and otherworldly, with strange, glowing markings across their skin and sharp eyes that seemed to pierce through everything. But none of that mattered to Daniel when he saw Princess Alira step out of the ship. She was unlike anyone he had ever seen before. Her presence was commanding, yet graceful, as though she moved with a confidence that made the very air around her seem to shift. Alira was not just any Zaneri. She was royalty. And when her eyes met Daniel's, something unexpected happened. Instead of passing him by like everyone else did, she looked at him and smiled. For a moment, Daniel didn't know what to make of it. Nobody smiled at him. Not here. Not in this place where he was constantly overlooked. "Come," Alira said, her voice smooth and melodic. "I want to speak with you." The words felt strange. She wants to speak with me. Daniel couldn't believe it. But there was something in her gaze, something genuine, that made him stand up and follow her without a second thought. The people of the colony watched in disbelief as Daniel walked beside the princess. They whispered among themselves, eyes wide, some curious, some nervous. The human government had just signed an agreement with the Zaneri Empire for peaceful trade, but no one knew how things would truly unfold. To see one of their leaders, a princess no less, take such an interest in someone like Daniel was unusual. Alira led him to a quiet spot near the center of the colony, where a small fountain sparkled in the last light of day. She gestured for him to sit, and he did, unsure of what was happening but too curious to refuse. "Tell me," Alira said, her eyes glowing faintly in the dimming light. "What is it like to be human?" Daniel blinked. The question caught him off guard. "What do you mean?" he asked. She tilted her head, considering him carefully. "I've seen many races in my travels," she said softly. "But there's something about humans. Your resilience, your ability to adapt. It's fascinating." Daniel felt a mix of pride and discomfort at the praise. "We do what we have to do. It's not special." "You think not?" Alira asked, her tone thoughtful. "What I see in you is something extraordinary, Daniel. Something that I haven't found in any other species." Daniel wasn't sure how to respond. He had always felt ordinary, like a piece that didn't quite fit in the puzzle of the universe. And yet here she was, an alien princess, telling him he was something special. She didn't speak again for a long time, her eyes fixed on the horizon. Daniel tried to think of something to say, but the weight of her words hung in the air like a heavy fog. He wondered why she had come to him of all people, and why she was showing him such kindness. But as the sun dipped lower, and the first stars began to twinkle in the sky, Alira finally spoke again. "I've been sent here on a mission," she said quietly, almost as if she was talking to herself. "To learn. To understand." "Understand what?" Daniel asked, his curiosity piqued. "Everything," she replied. "The way your people live. The way they think. Your strengths, your weaknesses, everything." Daniel's heart skipped a beat. Why? Her eyes met his, and this time, they weren't just glowing. They were intense, almost desperate. "Because," she said softly, "I need to know whether you're worth saving." The words hit Daniel like a cold wave, and for a moment, he didn't know how to respond. He wanted to ask what she meant, to demand to know what this was really about, but instead, he just sat there, staring at her. And then, in a quiet voice, she added, "There is so much at stake, Daniel. So much you don't understand." But before he could ask anything more, she stood up, her expression hardening. "You'll learn soon enough," she said cryptically, turning and walking away. Daniel sat there in stunned silence, trying to process everything that had just happened. One thing was clear: his life was about to change. And it was all because of her. The alien princess had come for a reason, and Daniel had no idea what that reason truly was. But he was going to find out, whether he wanted to or not. Daniel couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The conversation with Princess Alira had left him with more questions than answers, and he spent the rest of the night wandering the quiet streets of Vexus 3, trying to make sense of her words. Worth saving. What did she mean by that? And why did she pick him to speak with, of all people? The next morning, as he was helping with a shipment of supplies, Daniel noticed something unusual. The colonists, who usually avoided him like the plague, were now whispering about him in hushed voices. Some looked at him with curiosity, while others wore expressions of confusion. Daniel tried to ignore them, focusing on his work, but it was hard not to feel their eyes on him. He hadn't realized it, but the princess's visit had already made waves through the colony. Alira's sudden interest in Daniel had everyone talking. People who normally wouldn't give him a second glance were now looking at him as if he were some sort of mystery. Later that afternoon, Daniel found himself drawn to the spot where he had met Alira the day before. The fountain was still there, its waters gently splashing in the breeze. He stood there for a while, waiting. He wasn't sure what he expected, but a part of him couldn't shake the need to see her again, to understand why she had spoken to him the way she did. It didn't take long before he heard the soft sound of footsteps behind him. Turning, Daniel saw her. Princess Alira was walking towards him, her eyes scanning the area with an almost predatory focus. She seemed more serious today, her expression hard, as if she had a purpose she needed to fulfill. Yet when her gaze landed on him, a small, almost imperceptible smile appeared on her lips. "Daniel," she said, her voice like music in the quiet space. "I was hoping to find you." Daniel wasn't sure how to respond. He had so many questions, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, he just nodded, unsure of what else to do. "I need your help," Alira said, her tone unexpectedly serious. "There are things I must learn about your people, and there is no one else who can teach me. Not the way you can." Daniel blinked. "Teach you," he repeated. "What do you mean?" Alira walked closer, her eyes softening for just a moment before hardening again. "I need to understand why humans fight, why you resist when everything seems against you, why you're willing to stand up, even when you're outnumbered, outmatched. I need to understand that." Daniel frowned, confused. "We fight because we have to, because we don't give up. It's just what we do." Alira nodded slowly, as if processing his words. "That's what I don't understand," she said, almost to herself. "It's a trait I haven't found in other species. Your strength isn't just in your numbers or your technology. It's in your will to survive." Daniel felt a strange pride swell in his chest. "We don't have anything else," he said simply. "If we don't fight, we lose." "Exactly." Alira said, her voice low and intense. That's what I need to learn. Why do humans fight when everything seems hopeless? They stood there for a long time in silence, the weight of her question hanging between them like a thick fog. Daniel didn't know how to explain it any better than he already had. For humans, fighting was a way of life. It wasn't about winning. It was about surviving, about proving that no matter what the universe threw at them, they would always find a way to stand. Finally, Alira spoke again, her voice softer this time. I think I've learned a little already, but there is much more I need to understand. Daniel felt a sudden pang of unease. What are you really here for, Alira? What do you want from me? Alira hesitated, and for the first time, she looked uncertain. I don't know yet, she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. I was sent here to learn, to gather information. But, she paused, glancing at him with a look that seemed almost vulnerable. But I don't want to hurt you. Daniel was taken aback. Hurt me? I don't want to be the enemy, she said, her eyes locking onto his. I'm not sure anymore if I'm doing the right thing. I wasn't supposed to care about you, but I do. The words hit him harder than he expected. She cares. It didn't make sense. An alien princess, an enemy of humanity, if what she had said about her mission was true, caring about him, about humans. Daniel struggled to process it. But you came here for a reason, he said slowly, trying to keep his voice steady. You have a job to do. You're supposed to be learning about us, so that your people can conquer us. That's what you said. Alira flinched, her face tightening. I know, she whispered, but I didn't expect this connection. I didn't expect to care. Daniel couldn't believe what he was hearing. Was she saying that the princess of a vast empire, one of the most powerful species in the galaxy, was actually questioning her mission? A part of him wanted to tell her that she couldn't just change her mind, that the war was already coming, and there was no way out. But another part of him felt a strange hope. Could they really change things? Could a single person's doubt make a difference? I don't know what to believe anymore, Alira said, her voice trembling. All I know is that I need to understand why you fight, why you risk everything, even when it seems hopeless. Daniel looked into her eyes, seeing a sincerity that was hard to ignore. Maybe, just maybe, there was a chance to stop the war before it began. But that would mean risking everything. Trusting her. An alien princess who might very well be his enemy. I'll help you, Daniel said, his voice firm. Alira's eyes softened with surprise. You will? Yes, Daniel said, nodding. I don't know if it'll help, but I'll teach you. I'll show you why humans fight, why we don't give up. But you have to promise me something. What? That you'll make your own decision. Don't just do what your people tell you. Think for yourself. Alira smiled faintly. I promise. As they stood there, an unlikely bond began to form between them. It wasn't clear what would happen next, but Daniel couldn't deny the feeling that something was changing. And he had a strange sense that, together, they might just have a chance to change the future. The days after Daniel's conversation with Princess Alira felt different. The colony was still recovering from the shock of the alien princess's visit, and rumors spread like wildfire. People spoke in hushed tones about the princess's sudden interest in Daniel, and the idea of her wanting to learn about humans became a topic of constant debate. But for Daniel, it was more than just idle gossip. The princess's words kept echoing in his mind. I don't want to hurt you. There was something about that simple phrase that stuck with him. Alira wasn't just another alien diplomat. There was something deeper going on. He had to know more. That evening, after a long day of work at the supply depot, Daniel found himself walking the quiet streets of the colony again, his mind restless. He had been thinking about what Alira had said, and about the mysterious mission she had mentioned. What could it really be? Why had she been sent here? And why, out of all the humans, had she chosen him to speak with? As he approached the fountain once again, Daniel noticed a shadow moving in the distance. He froze for a moment, uncertain, but then he saw her, Princess Alira, standing under the flickering light of a nearby street lamp. She looked as if she had been waiting for him. "Daniel," she greeted, her voice calm but with an edge of urgency. "I need to speak with you." He nodded, his curiosity piqued. "About what?" Alira gestured for him to follow her. "Not here. It's safer elsewhere." They walked in silence for a few minutes, the sound of their footsteps the only noise in the darkened streets. Finally, they arrived at a small, hidden alcove in the colony, a place where the walls were thick and the noise of the city seemed to fade away. "What's going on, Alira?" Daniel asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "You've been acting strange. What is it you're not telling me?" Alira took a deep breath, her eyes scanning the area around them, as if making sure they weren't being watched. When she finally spoke, her voice was low, almost as if she was afraid of being overheard. "I wasn't just sent here to learn about your people," she confessed, her eyes meeting his with a mixture of guilt and fear. "I was sent here to prepare for what's coming. The Zenari Empire is planning an invasion of Earth." Daniel's heart skipped a beat. An invasion? His mind raced, trying to process the enormity of what she had just said. "Wait, what? You're saying your people are planning to invade Earth? Why?" Alira's gaze softened. "The Zenari see Earth as a valuable resource. Your planet is rich in minerals, water, and other essential materials. But more than that, it's a strategic location in the galaxy. The Empire wants control over it." Daniel felt a knot form in his stomach. "So everything you said before, the learning, the questions about humans, was all just a part of your mission?" Alira looked away, her face tightening. "Yes, but it wasn't supposed to happen this way. I was sent to gather information, to understand your strengths and weaknesses, and then report back to the Empire. The invasion was always the end goal." She paused, then added, "But when I met you, things changed. I didn't expect to feel anything, but I do. I care about what happens to your people, Daniel." Daniel's mind was spinning. This wasn't just about diplomacy or trade. This was about war, the kind of war that would change everything for humanity. "So, what happens now?" he asked. "What do we do?" Alira took a step closer, her voice filled with determination. "We stop it. I'm not going to let my people destroy yours. I'm going to help you, Daniel. Together, we can warn Earth, prepare the colonies, and maybe, just maybe, we can prevent the invasion from ever happening." Daniel looked into her eyes, searching for any hint of doubt, but all he saw was resolve. There was no turning back now. He had already started down a path with Alira, and he couldn't back out, not when the stakes were this high. "All right," Daniel said, his voice firm. "Let's figure out how to stop this. Together." Alira's face softened, and for a moment, she looked almost relieved. "Thank you, Daniel. I knew you'd understand." She glanced around once more, then lowered her voice. "We need to move quickly. The Zenari Empire won't wait much longer to launch the invasion. I've been keeping an eye on their movements, and everything is in place for the attack to begin within the next few weeks." Daniel's thoughts raced. "We have no time to waste. Then, we need to warn Earth. Get the word out to the right people before it's too late." Alira nodded. "I've already sent some preliminary messages to key officials in your government, but they won't believe it unless they have evidence. That's where you come in. I need you to help me gather that evidence, to prove to them that the invasion is real." Daniel didn't hesitate. "What do you need me to do?" Alira hesitated for a moment, her gaze hardening. "There's a Zenari warship on the outskirts of the colony. It's one of the smaller ships, meant for reconnaissance. I need you to get aboard it, disable its communications, and retrieve any classified data that might give us more information about the invasion plans. Once we have that, we can take it to Earth and prove everything." Daniel's stomach twisted. The idea of sneaking onto an enemy warship, even one as small as a reconnaissance vessel, was terrifying. But he knew that there was no other option. It was a dangerous mission, but it was the only way to stop the invasion before it started. "I'll do it," he said, his voice steady despite the fear creeping up inside him. Alira looked at him with a mixture of admiration and gratitude. "I knew I could count on you." They stood there for a moment, both of them lost in the weight of what was about to happen. The fate of Earth, and possibly the entire galaxy, was in their hands. Daniel didn't know if they could succeed. He didn't know if he was ready for what was coming. But one thing was certain: there was no turning back now. The days following Daniel's conversation with Princess Alira were filled with a sense of urgency. The knowledge that an invasion was coming, one that would destroy everything Daniel had ever known, weighed heavily on his shoulders. He knew he had no choice but to act, but the thought of boarding the Zenari warship, let alone trying to sabotage it, was terrifying. Yet the more he thought about it, the more determined he became. The fate of Earth rested on his ability to stop the invasion. That night, under the cover of darkness, Daniel met Alira again, this time near the edge of the colony. The streets were empty, the usual sounds of life silenced by the late hour. The two of them moved swiftly, their footsteps barely making a sound on the dusty ground. Alira's sharp eyes were constantly scanning the area, ever vigilant for any sign of danger. "Are you sure this is the only way?" Daniel asked quietly as they walked. Alira glanced at him, her face set in determination. "Yes, the Zenari warship is our only lead. It's one of their smaller vessels, used for reconnaissance and intelligence gathering. If we can get aboard and retrieve the data, we can prove to your people that the invasion is real. We can't waste any more time." Daniel nodded, feeling the weight of the mission pressing down on him. His heart raced with anticipation, but there was no turning back. The warship was just ahead, hidden among the thick trees and tall grass. It was well camouflaged, its dark shape blending in with the environment around it. But Daniel knew exactly where it was. They'd reached the edge of the forest where the warship was stationed, and Alira held up her hand, signaling for Daniel to stop. They crouched low, peering through the trees at the vessel in the distance. It was smaller than he had expected, sleek and dark, almost like a shadow among the trees. "Stay quiet," Alira whispered. "We don't want them to know we're here." Daniel's nerves were on edge. He had never been on a mission like this before. The thought of sneaking past armed Zenari soldiers, all while knowing that failure meant the end of humanity, was enough to make him sweat with fear. But he forced himself to stay calm, breathing in deeply, focusing on the task ahead. Alira moved silently, slipping through the trees with practiced ease. She was a Zenari, after all, born and trained for stealth and strategy. Daniel did his best to keep up, trying to move as quietly as possible. The closer they got to the warship, the more tense the air felt. When they finally reached the ship's outer perimeter, Alira pointed to a small door near the base of the vessel. It was guarded by two Zenari soldiers, standing motionless and alert. Alira's eyes narrowed as she studied the guards, calculating their movements. "We'll need to get rid of them," Alira murmured. "I'll distract them. You take care of the rest." Daniel wasn't sure what she meant by "take care of the rest," but he trusted her. He nodded and positioned himself behind a large rock, watching as Alira began to move. With swift, fluid movements, Alira stepped into view, making enough noise to draw the attention of the guards. As they turned toward her, she quickly dashed to the side, using the shadows to her advantage. The guards hesitated for a moment, unsure of what to do. Daniel took the opportunity to sprint toward the door. He was close now, just a few more steps, and he would be inside. But as he reached for the handle, a sharp voice called out, "Who goes there?" One of the guards shouted. Daniel's heart leaped into his throat. He turned to see the two Zenari soldiers charging toward him, weapons raised. His mind raced. He had no time to think. Reacting on instinct, Daniel grabbed a small device from his pocket and activated it, sending out a loud, disorienting noise that echoed across the area. The guards stopped in their tracks, clutching their ears in pain as the sound rang through the air. The distraction worked. Alira used the moment to leap from her hiding place and quickly subdue one of the soldiers with a well-placed strike to the neck. The other guard, disoriented by the noise, was easy for Daniel to overpower. He tackled the soldier to the ground, knocking him unconscious in seconds. "Good work," Alira whispered as she quickly dragged the unconscious guards into the shadows. "Now let's get inside." They both hurried to the door, and Alira quickly bypassed the security system with a few swift movements. The door slid open, revealing a dark, narrow corridor inside the ship. Daniel followed her in, his heart still pounding from the close call outside. Once inside, Alira turned to him, her voice calm but urgent. "We need to find the main control room. That's where they'll keep the data we need." They moved down the corridor, avoiding any patrols that might be nearby. Alira seemed to know exactly where to go, leading the way with confidence. The ship's interior was sleek and metallic, lit by dim, glowing panels on the walls. It was far more advanced than anything humanity had ever built, and Daniel couldn't help but feel a sense of awe. After what felt like an eternity, they reached a heavy door at the end of the corridor. Alira scanned the area for any guards, then swiftly unlocked the door with a small device. It opened with a soft hiss, revealing a large room filled with computers, data terminals, and large holographic displays. "This is it," Alira whispered. "Help me search for the files." Daniel immediately moved to one of the terminals, his hands shaking slightly as he accessed the system. He wasn't a hacker, but he knew enough to get by. He quickly found a series of encrypted files marked with high-level security clearance. The names of the files were coded, but Alira's sharp eyes scanned the screen. "Here," she said. "These files contain the invasion plans. Retrieve them." With a few swift keystrokes, Daniel downloaded the files onto a portable data drive. As soon as the download was complete, they heard footsteps approaching the door. Daniel's heart stopped. "They're coming," he said, panic rising in his chest. "We have to move now," Alira ordered. They grabbed the data drive and sprinted toward the exit, but just as they reached the door, it slid open, and two Zenari soldiers stepped into the room. Without thinking, Daniel lunged at one of them, knocking him off balance. Alira swiftly disarmed the other, leaving them both unconscious on the floor. The sound of alarms started to blare, signaling that their presence had been detected. They had to hurry. Alira grabbed Daniel's arm and pulled him toward an escape hatch at the far end of the room. As they crawled through the hatch and out into the night, Daniel knew one thing for sure: they had succeeded. They had the evidence they needed to stop the invasion. But the real battle was just beginning. The night was tense as Daniel and Alira hurried back toward the colony. The sounds of alarms still echoed in the distance, growing fainter with each passing second. They had escaped the Zenari warship, but they knew it wasn't over yet. The data they had stolen was the key to preventing the invasion, but getting it into the right hands was another challenge entirely. Alira moved quickly, her steps light and calculated, as she led Daniel through the back alleys of the colony. She glanced over her shoulder, ensuring that no Zenari soldiers had followed them. The streets were empty, save for the occasional flicker of a light from the nearby buildings. Despite their successful mission, Daniel couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. "Do you think they'll catch up to us?" Daniel asked, his voice low. "No," Alira replied, her gaze focused ahead. "They'll be busy searching the warship and trying to figure out what happened. We have time." Daniel nodded, though doubt lingered in his mind. The Zenari were relentless, and it was only a matter of time before they figured out that something had gone wrong. They had to act fast. The two of them made their way to a hidden entrance near the center of the colony, one that only a few trusted individuals knew about. Alira quickly unlocked the door and ushered Daniel inside. The room beyond was dimly lit, filled with computers, crates, and supplies. It was a safe house, a place where people who wanted to avoid the prying eyes of the Zenari could go to regroup and plan. "We should lay low for a while," Alira suggested, her voice steady. I'll start decrypting the files. We need to know exactly what the Zenari are planning. Daniel took a seat at one of the tables, still processing everything that had happened. He had always imagined that humanity's first contact with an alien race would be a peaceful one, full of wonder and excitement. Instead, it had been nothing like that. The Zenari didn't care about diplomacy. They cared about power, and they were willing to destroy anything, or anyone, that stood in their way. What if the people on Earth don't believe us? Daniel asked. Even with the data, how can we convince them? What if they think it's a trick? Elira looked at him, her expression thoughtful. That's why we need to gather more evidence. If we can find a way to contact the higher-ups on Earth, we need to be sure they'll trust us. This isn't just about the colony anymore. It's about saving your entire planet. Daniel's mind raced. It felt impossible. How could they stop something as big as an invasion? And who would listen to two people, one human, one alien, claiming that an entire empire was about to destroy Earth? As Elira worked on decrypting the files, Daniel's thoughts wandered to his family, his parents, his younger sister. What would happen to them if the Zenari invasion succeeded? He couldn't let that happen. He had to do everything he could to stop it. What happens when you finish decrypting the files? Daniel asked, breaking the silence. Elira paused for a moment, her fingers hovering over the keyboard. I'll know exactly what the Zenari are planning, where they're going to strike when the invasion is set to begin, and how we can stop it. But it won't be enough to just have the data. We need a plan. Daniel frowned. And how do we come up with that plan? We start by finding weaknesses, Elira said, her voice cold with determination. The Zenari aren't invincible. They've underestimated humanity before, and we can use that to our advantage. Just then, the sound of a door creaking open interrupted their conversation. Daniel's heart skipped a beat as he turned toward the entrance. A figure stepped into the room, casting a long shadow across the floor. It was a man, tall and imposing, wearing a uniform that marked him as someone of importance. Elira stood up quickly, her hand instinctively reaching for the weapon at her side. But the man raised a hand in peace. Hold on, Elira. It's just me, he said, his voice deep and calm. Elira relaxed, lowering her hand. Tarek, she said, nodding slightly. I wasn't expecting you. Tarek was a member of the Underground Resistance, a group that had been fighting against the Zenari occupation of their world for years. He was known for his tactical brilliance and his ability to get in and out of dangerous situations without being noticed. What's going on? Daniel asked, trying to keep his voice steady. Tarek looked at him, his sharp eyes scanning the room. I heard about your mission, he said to Elira, his tone serious. The Zenari are already searching the colony for you too. It won't be long before they figure out you have something important. Elira nodded, not surprised. We have the data. We need to send it to Earth before it's too late. Tarek's eyes flicked to Daniel. I've got a contact on Earth. Someone who can help you get that data to the right people. But it's going to be a risky move. The Zenari are watching all communications right now. Sending that kind of data could expose us all. Daniel's stomach churned. What do you suggest we do? Tarek took a deep breath, his gaze hardening. We send the data in small parts, scattered across different channels. That way, the Zenari won't be able to trace it all back to us at once. It'll take time, but it's the only way we can get the information to Earth without getting caught. Elira thought for a moment, then nodded. It's risky, but it's our best option. We'll need your help, Tarek continued, turning to Daniel. You'll be the one to make sure the data gets to the right hands. You're the human link. If anyone can get this information to Earth without raising suspicion, it's you. Daniel didn't hesitate. He had no other choice. He couldn't fail now. His planet's future depended on what they did next. All right, Daniel said, his voice steady despite the fear rising inside him. Let's do it. Tarek nodded and stepped forward. We'll make it happen, but we need to move fast. Time is running out. As the three of them began to make their plans, Daniel couldn't help but feel a sense of hope rising inside him. The road ahead was still dangerous, but they had a chance. A chance to stop the invasion, and maybe even change the fate of Earth forever. The underground resistance's plan was risky, but it was their best chance. Daniel sat at a small table in the safe house, the faint glow of a holographic map illuminating his face. His mind was racing, trying to piece everything together. The Zenari were closing in on them. Their search for the stolen data had already begun, and the longer they stayed in the colony, the more dangerous it became. Tarek, Alira, and Daniel huddled together, reviewing the plan one last time. They had to be careful, calculating every move. The Zenari were smart, and they would stop at nothing to find them. "We have one shot at this," Tarek said, his voice calm but firm. "Once we send the data to Earth, there's no turning back. We can't risk getting caught." "I understand," Daniel replied, nodding. His hands were shaking slightly, but he forced himself to focus. His entire world had changed in the last few days, and now it felt like everything depended on him. Alira stood up from her seat, her face hard with determination. "We'll need to split up. The data needs to be sent from different locations to avoid detection. Each of us will take a part, and we'll send it using different channels. Tarek will guide us from a safe distance." Daniel glanced at the two of them. The weight of the mission pressed down on him. They were going up against an alien force, and they couldn't afford to fail. "What happens if we're caught?" Daniel asked, his voice barely a whisper. Alira's eyes softened for just a moment. "If we're caught, we won't be able to send the data. But we can't let that stop us. We're not just fighting for ourselves. We're fighting for everyone. And we won't let the Zenari take Earth without a fight." Daniel nodded again. He had no other choice. Earth needed this data. His family needed this data. The whole planet's future rested in their hands. The safe house was quiet as they prepared to leave. Each of them packed a small bag with supplies, nothing that would draw attention, but just enough to keep them going for a few days. The resistance had its own hidden tunnels that would lead them out of the colony and into the surrounding forests. From there, they would split up and send the data to Earth. It was late evening when they left the safe house, the sky painted with the colors of dusk. The colony was unusually quiet, the usual hum of life silenced by the looming threat of the Zenari. Every corner they turned, every shadow they passed, seemed to hold danger. Alira led the way, her sharp eyes scanning the surroundings as they moved through the back alleys. Tarek followed behind, his footsteps light and cautious. Daniel stayed in the middle, trying his best to stay calm. The plan was simple: get to the locations, send the data, and get out. But with the Zenari hunting them, even simple tasks could go wrong. After what felt like hours, they reached the first location. It was a small communications tower, hidden deep in the forest outside the colony. It was an old, abandoned station, but it still had the necessary equipment to send the data undetected. Alira moved swiftly, climbing up the tower with practiced ease. Daniel watched as she disappeared into the darkness above. "You stay here," Tarek whispered to Daniel. "If anything goes wrong, we'll need you to keep the signal running." Daniel nodded, his stomach tight with mirrors. His role was simple: stay behind, make sure the data transfer went smoothly, and keep an eye out for any Zenari patrols. He stood by the base of the tower, his eyes scanning the trees, his heart pounding in his chest. Minutes felt like hours as he waited. The silence of the forest was broken only by the rustle of leaves in the wind and the occasional chirp of distant insects. Daniel's mind kept wandering back to his family, his parents, his sister. He thought of them every time the weight of the mission threatened to crush him. Finally, Alira's voice came through his comm. "It's done. I'm moving to the next location." "Got it," Daniel replied, his voice steady despite the tension in his chest. He watched as she climbed down the tower and disappeared into the darkness. The next location was further into the forest. Daniel and Tarek waited for a few moments before they began their trek to the next communications point. The moon was high in the sky now, casting long shadows over the forest floor. Every crack of a twig, every movement in the trees, made Daniel's heart race. He couldn't afford to let his guard down. The journey to the second location was far more dangerous. As they neared the communications center, Tarek signaled for them to stop. A Zenari patrol was nearby, moving in their direction. Daniel's breath caught in his throat as he crouched low behind a cluster of bushes. The patrol was small, only 2 Zenari soldiers, but they were close enough to be a problem. If they were spotted, it could blow the entire mission. "We wait," Tarek whispered. "Stay still." Daniel tried to calm his racing heart. He had never been in a situation like this before. The soldiers were getting closer, their heavy boots crunching on the dry leaves. He could hear their voices, low and garbled, speaking in their native language. He had no idea what they were saying, but he knew they had to stay hidden. Minutes passed, feeling like an eternity. Finally, the patrol passed by, unaware of their presence. Daniel let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. "That was too close," Daniel whispered. Tarek gave him a small smile. "We made it. Now let's keep moving." They reached the second communications center without further incident. This one was located in an old warehouse, surrounded by tall metal fences and guarded by security cameras. But it wasn't anything the Resistance hadn't dealt with before. Alara got to work on the equipment, hacking into the system with skill and precision. She wasn't just a fighter, she was a tech expert, and her knowledge of Zenari systems was invaluable. As Daniel stood guard, watching for any signs of trouble, he couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. It was too quiet. They were too close to success. It was almost as if the Zenari were waiting for them. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, Alara sent the final part of the data. "It's done," she said, her voice calm but firm. "Earth has the information. Now we just need to get out of here." But just as they turned to leave, the unmistakable sound of Zenari soldiers approaching reached their ears. "They know we're here," Tarek said grimly. "It's time to go. Fast." The sound of Zenari boots echoed through the hallway, sending a wave of panic through Daniel's chest. Alara, Tarek, and he had barely finished sending the last part of the data when the alarm went off, signaling that their presence had been detected. The Zenari were coming, and they were closing in fast. "Move," Tarek shouted, his voice sharp and urgent. "We need to get out of here now." Alara wasted no time. She grabbed Daniel's arm and pulled him toward the back door of the warehouse. The 3 of them dashed through the dark, narrow alleyway behind the building, their footsteps muffled by the heavy silence of the night. They had to keep moving. There was no time to think, no time to hesitate. Daniel's mind raced as they ran. The data was safely sent to Earth, but the danger wasn't over. They had made it this far, but now they had to escape before the Zenari found them. Tarek led the way, his movements swift and precise. Alara was close behind him, her eyes scanning the area for any signs of Zenari patrols. Daniel followed, doing his best to keep up, his heart pounding in his chest. Every second felt like a lifetime. They made it to the edge of the warehouse district and into the dense forest beyond. The trees, dark and imposing, seemed to offer a false sense of security. But Daniel knew better. The Zenari had eyes everywhere. They couldn't afford to let their guard down for even a second. Tarek held up his hand, signaling for them to stop. He crouched low, peering through the trees to where the main road lay just ahead. Several Zenari soldiers were patrolling the area, moving in pairs. They had set up a blockade, likely in response to the data theft. The blockade was heavily guarded, and if they tried to pass through it, they would be caught. "This is bad," Alara whispered, her voice filled with frustration. "We can't go through the main road. It's too risky." Tarek thought for a moment, his eyes scanning the terrain. "There's a small path up ahead, through the hills. It's not marked on any maps. but it's our best shot. Lead the way, Daniel said, determination settling into his chest. He couldn't afford to waste time. The Cenari had to be stopped. The three of them moved quietly through the forest, taking care not to make a sound. Daniel's nerves were on edge as they approached the hidden path. It was barely visible, the thick underbrush and overhanging branches obscuring the way. But Tarek knew where to go, and Alira followed with quiet confidence. As they made their way through the path, Daniel's thoughts turned back to Earth. They had done it. They had sent the data. Now, it was up to the people on Earth to take action. But even as he thought of Earth's future, he couldn't shake the feeling that the Cenari weren't done with them yet. They were persistent, ruthless, and they wouldn't stop until they had what they wanted. Finally, after what seemed like hours, the path opened up into a small clearing. They had reached the edge of the forest. But before they could take a breath of relief, the sound of engines filled the air. Cenari warships. They'd found us, Tarek said grimly, his face hardening. We have to make it to the cave now. Without another word, they broke into a sprint, heading toward the rocky cliffs on the far side of the clearing. A narrow entrance to a hidden cave lay just beyond the rocks. It was their only chance to escape. But as they ran, a loud explosion rang out behind them. The ground trembled beneath their feet, and the air was thick with smoke. One of the Cenari warships had fired on their position. We're too exposed, Alira shouted. We need cover. Tarek didn't hesitate. He grabbed Daniel and Alira by the arms, pulling them toward a large rock outcrop. The explosion had shaken the ground, and dust and debris filled the air, making it difficult to see. But they couldn't stop now. Keep moving, Tarek ordered, his voice urgent. We can't outrun them, but we can hide. They made it to the cave entrance, breathless and covered in dirt. Tarek quickly pulled a small device from his bag and activated it. A light blinked on the device, indicating that it had connected to a hidden communication relay. The Cenari would have a hard time tracking them here. We're not safe yet, Alira said, her eyes scanning the cave's entrance. They'll be looking for us. They won't give up. Tarek nodded. We'll have to wait it out, but we've sent the data. Earth has it now. That's the most important thing. Daniel tried to steady his breathing, though his heart still raced. The cave was cold, and the air smelled damp and stale. They were far from safe, but at least they were hidden for the moment. We did it, Daniel whispered, looking at Tarek and Alira. We stopped them. The Cenari won't invade Earth now. Tarek's face softened, just for a moment. We've done our part. Now it's up to the people on Earth. They have the information. They can fight back, but we can't relax just yet. Alira, who had been silent for a while, looked at Daniel. You've been brave, Daniel. You've helped us more than you know. Daniel smiled faintly, exhaustion settling in. I didn't do it alone. We all did. As they sat in the cold cave, waiting for the Cenari to move on, Daniel couldn't help but feel a sense of relief. The battle wasn't over, but they had won a small victory. Earth's future was no longer in the hands of the Cenari. It was in the hands of the humans who would rise to defend it. The Cenari might have been relentless, but humans were resilient, and they would fight to the very end to protect their home.